Alright, I am back with another video, and today we have a patron build once again. Today we're doing the Chosen of Igwilf, or perhaps you might know her by a different name, that being Tasha. That's right, the Tasha. For those of you who know D&D, this is the same Tasha that is on the cover of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is widely considered to be one of, if not the best, D&D book, as it added a ton of things to the game, such as some of the game's most well-known cantrips and even the artificer class. And honestly, she's such a fun character. A wizard who became so good at what she does, that specifically being summoning magic, planar binding, necromancy, and is such like a detailed lorekeeper that she's written hundreds of books in lore, all about various different bits of magic that no one else even thought to look at, which is why her book is Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, because she just does a little bit of everything. She even ascended to an Archfey, and as such, has become a patron for Warlocks. So basically, she is the kind of, I guess, end game for any D&D player character, someone who eventually becomes so strong that they just ascend to the point where they can give power to the next player character, in a sense. Tasha is just a very, very interesting character. She's done a lot of things. She's had relationships with demons, which was an interesting thing to read about on the wiki, amongst many other things, and has laid claim to hundreds of powerful artifacts, one of which she's somewhat well known for. Otherwise, though, she's just a very interesting character with a very interesting skill set, so it was very fun to come up with a build that fits that skill set. So obviously, because her whole thing is that she kind of started with summoning magic, that is going to be a focus of the build. We're going to be getting some demon summoning here, as well as some other things, as well as necromantic magic, as I said, and basically as many sort of different spells that fit her repertoire as we can get, because she's known for creating a lot of magic items and either her own spells, Tasha's Hideous Laughter for example, and as such we're going to want to make sure that we get those in this build somehow. Again, she has so many very specific abilities, including spells that aren't even available in D&D normally, let alone in Baldur's Gate 3, but I found ways to make most of them work. But I do literally have a checklist in front of me just to remember that to take them all, because it's a lot. But otherwise, this is going to be a pretty fun kind of sort of battlefield control build, a good party face as well with the Archfey stuff, as well as just having the ability to use pretty much every spell in the game, so long as you get lucky enough to find the stuff that we need for it, because there are going to be some spells on this build that if you want to get them, it might be better to learn them from scrolls, but otherwise, you can get 99% of the spells that we need for this build without scrolls. There's just one or two that I want to pick up from scrolls, and then if you happen to find scrolls for some of the others, it does free up your main spell selection. So feel free to play around with, the levels on this one and like your spell selection, because really Tasha can use anything, but she does have a few key things that she's known for that I think we can make good use of here. So without further ado, let's get into the build. We're going to be playing as a bard today. I know. Lots of bards lately. My last video was also a bard, but that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. I ended up recording that Valor Bard build just out of kind of like a spontaneous thing, and now this was already pre-planned ahead of time. Tongue twisted today. So, was kicking things off as a bard, mainly because this is going to give us more skill proficiencies, which is nicer for being the face of the party, but it is also pretty much going to give us everything we need in terms of weapon and armor proficiencies, because we're just going to be using like kind of basic clothing and basically only a couple of different types of weapons, both of which we'll have access to with this starting class, so it's absolutely fine. So, for our cantrips, obviously we're going to be taking Vicious Mockery and Friends. We are going to have an Archfey patron here, so I feel like it makes sense to have some mental manipulation. Vicious Mockery and Friends allow us to do just that, and we'll have the ability to pick up more cantrips later on. We're also going to be able to grab some spells at this level, and I feel like we got a pretty decent selection to start, although I would change one. First up, the obvious choice is Tasha's Hideous Laughter, allowing us to leave a creature prone with laughter. I mean, if we don't have this spell on this build, what are we doing? I would definitely have failed making a Tasha build if I did not include this spell. Otherwise though, I would also recommend, if you want to do a fun little roleplay side objective with this build, do the Sentient Amulet quest, in which if you play your cards right, you can get a version of this spell permanently added to your character in a fun lore way. So honestly, I would recommend doing that questline as kind of like a side thing for this build, but otherwise you can still just get the spell here. Moving on to our other spell, we have access to Sleep. This is just another great enchantment spell, which again Tasha is kind of known for, so I feel like just picking up a lot of enchantment spells makes sense, which is why we also have Charm Person here, to be able to charm humanoids so that they don't attack us. Again, feels very Archfey. Otherwise though, your other spell choices are kind of up to you. I did originally have Fairy Fire here, but I think we're gonna pick this up from another spell list in a minute, because I kind of wanted to change my spell list selection around a little bit, so we're actually just going to grab Speak with Animals instead, so that we have our full roleplay opportunities ahead of us. For our starting instrument, doesn't really matter what you pick. Honestly, it's a pick your favourite situation. We also have a pretty standard ability score spread for level 1 here. Kicking things off, we have Strength at 8 because we don't need it, Dexterity at 14 because we don't really need the highest armor class in the world. I care more about our Constitution saving throws. Speaking of, our Constitution is at 16. Intelligence is at 8, although this will be set to a 17, so an effective 16 with the Warped Headband of Intellect. I know, using stat boosting items sucks, and it might technically not be needed on this build depending on how you want to change things up, but it did feel like it made the build synergize a bit better just by using the Warped Headband of Intellect on this build, so that's what I've decided to go with. Wisdom is at 12 because we don't really need it on this build, but I like to have those saving throws, and Charisma is at 16 because it's obviously going to be our main spellcasting modifier for the majority of our spells. Moving on to skill proficiencies, I have obviously gone with the Sage background. This character's whole deal, similar to Tasha herself, is being a lorekeeper, getting as many spells and stories as possible, writing tomes about them, and then storing them in a big library somewhere. We literally accrue as much magical knowledge as possible, so Sage makes a ton of sense. Arcana and History are going to come from this, as well as using the Warped Headband of Intellect to bump up those skill proficiencies quite nicely. We're also going to gain access to Perception because I am playing a High Elf today, and that is with good reason, because this allows us to get Booming Blade right away at level 1. For those of you that don't know, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything introduced the Booming Blade cantrip, and is considered one of the most iconic parts of the book, so I wanted to include it here as a nod to that. Obviously you don't need to play a High Elf on this build, but I wanted to have other cantrips in addition to Booming Blade, and this is just a great way to get it right away at level 1. And of course we are actually going to be using a couple of melee weapons with this build, which I'll explain a bit more about in a bit. So, and because we're actually going to have pretty decent chance to hit with our main weapon, because it's going to use our spellcasting modifier, then we don't have to worry about Booming Blade too much overall. So honestly, it's just a nice extra damage option. And again, because this is literally the Tasha build, it makes sense to have Tasha's most iconic cantrip from her book. Moving on, we also have Deception, Intimidation, and Persuasion as our bardic skills at level 1 here, just so we can be the optimal face of the party. Right, that's level 1. Right away at level 2, we're going to take a multi-class dip into, you guessed it, Wizard. Wizard is going to give us a ton of stuff to work with, namely being able to learn spells from scrolls, which is going to be huge for our playstyle later on, as we are going to want to collect a few things from scrolls, like I said, as well as it just gives you that fun side quest of accruing knowledge and adding more stuff to your spell list through scrolls, stuff you might normally have access to if you just went pure Bard, for example, or pure Warlock. So Wizard is just going to give us a ton to do, and it allows us to use that intelligence modifier we're going to be getting from the Warped Headband. So, for starters, cantrips, and you've got a lot of options here, but as I said, Tasha is a master of necromantic magic, kind of being one of her main things, so we can grab either Toll the Dead or Bone Chill here. And since I've taken Bone Chill quite a lot recently, specifically with the Shadow of the Dead build, we're going to be grabbing the Toll the Dead spell. We also can grab something else if we like, and unfortunately without the Mistress Spells mod, which I'm thinking might make a return to the channel soon, we'll see, we don't have access to Tasha's Caustic Brew. So let's grab Acid Splash for now, as a kind of minor version of it that we can use as a cantrip. But remember, you can learn Melf's Acid Arrow from scrolls, which could be a nice alternative. We have one more option here to choose for our final cantrip, and honestly, Mage Hand is the quintessential wizard cantrip in my opinion, aside from Prestidigitation, which we don't have access to in this game, so Mage Hand is pretty much required here, because I like how iconic it feels to the kind of vibe of a well-accomplished spellcaster. Moving on to our spell selection, we are going to need Mage Armour on this one as we're using clothing and we don't get an armoured defense any other way. But then the rest is kind of up to you. Shield, obviously, always good. I like to personally recommend Chromatic Orb so we have access to all the elements. Magic Missile is another quintessential wizard spell, so it'll be great in the early game. Then the rest is kind of up to you. I kind of like Ray of Sickness because it is a necromancy spell, so that does fit Tasha's skill set quite well. And I could also see you going for Fog Cloud, Colour Spray, Disguise Self, Elf. There's a lot of different things you could grab here. Thunderwave, Witch Bolt. Tasha is kind of a witch, so it makes sense. Find Familiar also obviously does fit the theme, but we will be getting a different version of the spell a bit later on. So really, it's a pick your favourite situation. Go with your gut, go with your heart, go with your brain, I guess. Honestly, pick your favourite. We only get to prepare one spell on this screen, but obviously once you have the Warped Headband of Intellect and have hit the max level of the build, you'll have way more spaces to attune things. I will also talk about a couple of spells that I put on this build via scrolls. First up is Sights of the Seelie Summon Diva. This is going to give us another planar binding style summoning spell, allowing us to summon an angel instead of just a devil. Coming with Wrathful Smite, Revivify, and Concussive Smash, this is a pretty powerful summon that is unique to a specific scroll in the late game. You can get a planar ally at level 6 spell level of cleric, so around level 11. I can't speak today. So you can get it that way, but this build is not going to take 11 levels of cleric just for one spell. So we're going to get two kind of parts of planar ally, the summoning the devil part and the summoning of the diva part, through other means. And here we're using the Sights of the Seelie scroll, which also makes sense because Archfey, Seelie Court, something I talked about a bit in my last Patron build. We're also going to grab Artistry of War and Dethrone. Obviously, Dethrone being a powerful necromancy spell makes sense for this build, and the fact that we have to delve into a secret sorcerer's library to acquire it just makes sense for a Chosen of Tasha. Same with Artistry of War. An upgraded version of Magic Missile that does an absolute buttload of damage that we can use once per short rest. Both Dethrone is once per long rest. But honestly, Artistry of War still feels a bit better to me overall because force damage isn't often resisted, and this is very powerful. So honestly, but you kind of want to pick both of these up because I feel like they just fit the vibe of the build. We also have Odaluk's Resilient Sphere, as Tasha did have an ability a bit similar to this, where she's able to kind of trap people inside capsules, almost Pokemon style, so I feel like Odaluk's makes sense. We're also going to be picking up the Quasit Familiar from the Scroll of Summon Cheeky Quasit from early on in the game, because Tasha was known to have a Quasit Familiar once upon a time, so it makes sense for us to pick it up here in the form of Shovel, Spoon, Fork, or whatever you decide to call them. So yeah, overall, that is the kind of spell selection I would go for. One that I missed in my testing, but I do also recommend for the build, is Enlarge Reduce, because one of Tasha's magic items that she made allows her to turn her enemies very small. So I feel like Enlarge Reduce also works here. So yeah, feel free to pick up those spells, but otherwise, that is our level of Wizard. Now, you could take a second level of Wizard here in order to gain access to a subclass, but honestly, we don't really need it, and I kind of want to go to higher levels in our main class, so we're going to take one more quick dip. I know, 3 dips at level 3 is a bit of a stretch, so feel free to take this a bit later, but I definitely want to get these Warlock levels in as early as possible. I say levels, plural, it's actually only 1 level, but hang, it's what we're here for. Luckily, the game has already picked our chosen subclass for us, which is the Archfey, giving us access to Fairy Fire and Sleep on the Warlock spell list, which is where we're going to get Fairy Fire from, as well as Fey Presence, allowing us to charm or frighten nearby foes with the Feywild's Beguiling Magics. As I said, Tasha did go on to become Igwilf the Archfey later on in her life, and again is a very, very powerful being, so it makes sense if we're going to be a patron of, we're going to have Tasha as our patron for us to be the Archfey. And Fey Presence makes sense, again Tasha is a master of enchantment magics, even making her own spells of the school, so I feel like it makes sense for us to get this ability here. We're also going to gain access to 2 cantrips, and while obviously we could have picked up Booming Blade here if you wanted to, if you didn't take High Elf as your starter, well obviously we can also just grab Eldritch Blast here as well, and I'm going to tell you now, we're going to do that. Normally I don't like to take Eldritch Blast in builds if I can help it, because it does feel like the bog standard choice, and I like to do things a bit differently, but I'm telling you now, if a very powerful wizard got access to Eldritch Blast and they had the option to take it, they absolutely would. So I feel like in this case Eldritch Blast makes sense for the sake of magical science. Those 2 words usually don't go together very well, but in Fantasyland it works. We also can pick up another spell of our choosing here, and I quite like grabbing Minor Illusion, because you know what? It, again, it's another kind of tricksy spell that makes sense for us. We also do get to choose 2 spells from our Warlock spell list. We already have Sleep, but we are going to pick up Fairy Fire here. Then for your next one, it's kind of up to you. We got most of the options here already, so Hex is a pretty solid option if you want to deal some extra necrotic damage, which again, it's an enchantment spell that does necrotic damage, so it kind of covers necromancy and enchantment spells in the same breath, so again, I feel like that makes sense for Tasha. Now for that, we're done with Warlock levels. Technically, you could go to level 2 for an extra spell and the Agonizing Blast invocation, as well as maybe Devil's Sight to be able to do some fun stuff with that, but otherwise, I really do want to push our Bard levels. Again, Tasha's whole thing is about being a magic lorekeeper, as I said, so going as high in Lore Bard as possible to get both instances of magical secrets, and I guess I kind of spoiled, yes, we're going with Lore Bard today, in order to gain as much bardic inspiration as possible for cutting words, as well as those magical secrets, as well as the high-level spells from the Bard spell list, which are going to fit Tasha very, very well. I feel like it makes sense to just go as high as we can here. So, we're going to get Jack of all trades, as well as Song of Rest. You guys already know what these do, two very powerful abilities. But as well, we're going to gain access to some more spells, and I feel like Dissonant Whispers is a pretty solid option here for a psychic damage spell that can frighten creatures. Moving on to Bard level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and yes, we are going with College of Lore today. I promise I'll return to College of Glamour one day, because I do need to cover that one more. But at this point, we're going to get Cutting Words, allowing us to use our bardic inspiration to debuff our enemies instead of just buffing our allies as a reaction. And I found that I ended up using this quite a bit in my testing, because again, by the time this build is done, we'll be able to reduce our enemies' attack rolls by like 1, and saving throws by like 1d10, which is really, really good. We're also going to gain access to a level 2 spell of our choosing, and we do have lots of options available to us. Necromancy spell, Blindness, we have Hold Person, which is another enchantment spell. You can go for Crown of Madness. I can see maybe why some people would think that maybe Enchantment Wizard is a better option for Tasha, and I can see why Split Enchantment would be very strong, but otherwise, I do think that Lore Bard does make the most sense overall, so I think I'll stick with it here, and this is what we decided as a community as well, because again, this was a community build. I'm just double checking my checklist to make sure I'm getting everything, and I think I am, so let's keep going. We're going to go with Hold Person because it is a powerful enchantment spell, but it's going to help out us and the whole team. We also do get to choose some abilities, some skill proficiencies. We get 3 skill proficiencies and 2 expertise. I am actually going to take those 2 expertise in Arcana and History, because I feel like that makes the most sense, and these are going to give us pretty beefy stats in that regard when we get to those higher levels. But of course, we do also get to choose 3 other skill proficiencies here, and really, it's entirely up to you. I like Insight and Investigation for this kind of character. I like the more intelligence-based checks, and Insight's always fun to have, so we have enough wisdom to make it somewhat viable. As for your final one, it's entirely up to you, but I do like Stealth, as we do get access to things like Invisibility and Greater Invisibility later, which I feel like some builds would want to make use of, so Stealth is always recommended. Right, there we go. Moving on to Bard level 4, we're going to gain access to another cantrip, and we kind of took most of them already, so let's take True Strike, because that's a fun spell. We also gain access to another level 2 spell of our choosing, and really it is up to you what you want to take here. I like Enhance Ability, I like Detect Thoughts, I like most of these here, not Lesser Restoration, but because we're actually going to be a summon build, and hear me out on this, because we're going to be a summoning build, we have a lot of people who we could potentially be healing, so I feel like Healing Word, just to give our summons a little bump, or even our party members, or even ourselves, it does just fit quite nicely. We're also going to be able to choose our first feat of the build, and at this point we're just going to bump up our charisma. At Bard level 5, we're going to get Font of Inspiration, allowing our Bardic Inspiration to come back on a short rest, as well as our Bardic Inspiration is going to be boosted up to a D8. We also gain access to level 3 spells, and at this point you've got a few options here, but I do like Glyph of Warding. Glyph of Warding can allow you to put enemies to sleep, dealing massive thunder damage, or detonating them to push them away. Like, it has a bunch of different damage types that kind of fit the build, so I want to make use of it here. At Bard level 6, we're going to gain access to Counter Charm, as well as another level 3 spell of our choosing, and this is going to be a kind of a pick your favourite situation. Obviously, any of the kind of enchantment or illusion spells will work quite nicely. Plant Growth can also work for that kind of Archfey vibe if you want to go down that route. Blindness, again, is another necromancy spell. Feel free to pick any of these. They do all pretty much work for Tasha. Again, she can pretty much do anything with magic, so it's not really a huge deal. I like Hypnotic Pattern, though, so that's what I'm going to go with. And now, Magical Secrets. Now, as you can see, we have a lot of spell choices here, but because we are a wizard, I will remind you that we can pretty much pick up most of these spells from Wizard Scrolls. Now, that does mean that that's going to take up our prepared spell slots from Wizard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off the spells that I absolutely recommend for this build the most, either based on mechanical utility or, you know, for lore stuff and such like that. So I kind of want to just show off the things that I want to prioritize with the magical secrets, but do know that you can get them from spell scrolls if you'd rather have them equipped that way. So let's talk about the spell options that we have available to us here. I'll kind of go from the bottom up. So the first one I want to draw attention to is Command. Tasha is known to have command over Fae specifically, but of course it's another enchantment spell with a bunch of powerful mind-controlling effects that does really fit this build, and I actually did end up using in my testing to pretty great effect, so I would recommend picking up Command as a potential option. Another option that I'll be talking about here is Spiritual Weapon. I won't discuss why yet, but trust me when I say it does fit the build, and I'll be talking about it later when we get access to it in another way. As for the main two spells that I want to take from this feature, we've got Slow and Haste. One of Tasha's artifacts that she created allows her to freeze time, and it actually ended up being her downfall. Her ability to freeze time actually was turned against her, causing her and her keep to be completely frozen in time when she was betrayed by someone. And as such, I think this character's relation to Tasha in the lore is that there's some sort of magical connection, and this person has been given a portion of Tasha's Archfey power in order to basically gain enough magical knowledge to find a way to travel to Tasha and break the spell freezing time. But of course, we can't freeze time. We're not going to 9th level spells here, so we can't get time stop. What we can do, though, is grab time manipulation. One is speeding up time, grabbing Haste, allowing us to make ourselves or an ally gain an additional action, more movement speed, and a +2 to their armor class. Or we can slow down time for our enemies, targeting up to 6 creatures and potentially slowing them on a wisdom save, meaning that they have to choose an action or a bonus action each turn, not both. They are slower when it comes to their movement, and their AC and dexterity saves are both reduced by 2, which is very, very good. The other ones I would pick would be the obvious counterspell, Fireball, and Animate Dead, because obviously we are a necromancer, but we have other ways of accessing a version of Animate Dead, as well as you can pick this up either through the Circlet of the Undead or through a spell scroll, so it's up to you. Counterspell, I mean, it's counterspell, you want to take this on any build that you can, so if you find it as a scroll, definitely pop it on, and then Fireball is Fireball, you already know why. But yeah, I feel like because the part of the freezing, with freezing time is so iconic to Tasha, I do think that grabbing Slow and Haste here is a pretty effective choice. Although, if you don't want to take Haste this way and you want to pick it up from the Darkfire Shortbow, because I haven't actually specified a ranged weapon on this build, you could take it there and maybe swap this out for something else, but we're getting so far off on a tangent on just the spell selection here that I'm just going to keep going. Moving on to Bard level 7, we're going to gain access to level 4 spells, and I want Dimension Door. Tasha is known for her ability to teleport. She's got very, very good teleporting magic, as I've found a lot of deity and patron builds tend to have. So Dimension Door is going to allow us to do that exact thing. Teleport and take a friend with us. Next up at Bard level 8, we get to choose another level 4 spell, and Polymorph is a pretty fun one. I like the idea of a tricksy Archfey type, as well as an accomplished wizard using Polymorph to turn an enemy into a sheep. I just think it's fun. Also, obviously, greater invisibility is an option too, as we did take that stealth proficiency. Right, now we get to choose a feat. If you want to max out your charisma here, feel free. If you want to bump up your dexterity or constitution, feel free. However, I would consider scrolling all the way down here and grabbing Warcaster, giving you advantage on saving throws to maintain concentration on a spell, and you can also use a reaction to cast Shocking Grasp on a target moving out of melee range. We're mainly here for that advantage on saving throws, but because of all the enchantment magic shenanigans we've got going on, I actually made use of that Shocking Grasp reaction a bit more than I would have expected. But otherwise, we want advantage on those saving throws, so this works for us. At Bard level 9, we're going to gain access to level 5 spells, and boy howdy, there's a few to choose from. But the main one I want to grab is Planar Binding. It's literally Tasha's whole thing. Her whole thing is how she started out at being an accomplished wizard, is that she went out, used Magic Circle, used summoning spells, bound demons into her service through Planar Binding, and then went on to make better versions of the Planar Binding spell, so that she could bind more planar beings. Like, that was literally her whole thing. She was basically the Forgotten Realms equivalent of a Pokemon master. like, now that I think about it. So, of course, we have to take Planar Binding on this build, even though it's only really a niche thing that has very few use cases in this game. It is still worth picking up for the lore reason alone. However, at this point, I think we've got an early level spell that we could swap out for something else. And I'll be honest, with the Friends cantrip, Charm Person might not be doing much for us at this point. I don't think this is going to be going off in combat too much, which is where Charm Person has an advantage over Friends. I feel like if you're going to use Friends, it's going to be in dialogue. You don't need to use Charm Person there, so let's swap it out for the upgraded version to Hold Person, Hold Monster, so we can now hold everything. Again, binding things down so we can capture them, or something like that. And finally, at Bard level 10, our Bardic Inspiration has now become a D10, meaning that it is the strongest it can be for this build. We also do get to choose another cantrip, and, Blade Wood, I guess? Not really many useful options here. We also do get to choose another spell, and again, because we're going to have so many summons out on the battlefield at once, I think Mass Cure Wounds is a good shout, although I can absolutely see Dominate Person being another powerful, viable option here. Again, with that command over Fey, I feel like it makes sense, so honestly, I actually think we could replace another spell at this point, something that you're not using very much. I think actually at this point, might not be too keen on Dissonant Whispers. Honestly, it's not really part of Tasha's natural skill set, although I could also see dropping Healing Word overall for that. You know what, we might drop Healing Word and just keep Mass Cure. No! See, this is where it's tricky. Tasha can do so many things, and I don't know what to replace here. I like Polymorph, but you know what, I might drop Polymorph. It's up to you, kind of choose your favourites here, but I do think Dominate Person is a good shout. You can throw a cloak on this build to get that, but we're going to be using a different cloak instead. However, here we go, the full level 10 magical secrets. Now, for the most part, not much has changed, but we now have access to level 4 and 5 spells, so let's look at our options here. First up, we get an access to another summoning spell through Conjure Elemental if we want to go down that route. There's also Banishing Smite and Banishment. Again, if we're summoning creatures from the planes, it makes sense to be able to send them back to where they came from too, in case things get a little bit out of our control. I think I would rather take Banishment, although I could absolutely see an argument being made for Banishing Smite, but we're not as much of a physical attacker, even though we do have access to a weapon and Booming Blade. We don't really need to think about that too much here. Otherwise, your other spell is kind of up to you. Obviously, Conjure Elemental makes sense. It is another summon, so I do feel like that would be the primo option here. But like I said, I did use Command in my testing, and I do think it works to great effect. So I'll be honest, if you have an opportunity to pick this one up because you got your other spells from spell scrolls or items, then I would absolutely suggest Command here. We also do get to grab a few more skill expertise at this level, and I like grabbing Persuasion and Deception because, again, Archfey. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is, well, at the end of the day, you can just kind of do everything. Like I said, you've got access to a ton of different control, damage, and support options here. You've got access to summons, allowing you to conjure a big old army. Let me head over to my wizard spells. We do get to go for 4 at this point, and this would be my kind of recommended choice. Overall, I did test the Throne, but I do think Artistry of War is better. And yes, so now we get access to all of these different spells here, just allowing us to summon, support, damage. We're the face of the party because we're a high charisma bard, so we're going to be good at that. We've got a once per short rest spell slot, which is always nice to have on any spellcaster build, even with that 1 level dip of Warlock. Bardic Inspiration for inspiring our allies to fight with us is going to be awesome for us. It's going to quickly cast Mage Armor. I wish they wouldn't turn around when I did that. That's kind of annoying. But as I said, we're just going to be able to have our own miniature army. This might even be a build that's viable for solo, just because you can do all of these different summons, which I think could actually be quite fun to test out in the future. Not that I've done that before. Not on a live stream, for sure. Perhaps not. But anyways, you get to just have access to everything that makes bards good, with the ability to make it even better using Wizard. And again, there are things you could change around to make the Wizard side of things maybe a bit better than the Warped Headband of Intellect. Maybe in the late game you want to grab the Amulet of Greater Health, which would allow you to put more points into Intelligence, yada yada yada. You guys can kind of figure that out yourselves. If you want to really optimize the build, there are ways to do it, but otherwise, for people who just want to have a casual average playthrough, this is still a solid way to do it. I'll admit, maybe the Warlock levels aren't adding at the Warlock level, I should say, isn't maybe adding as much as I think most people would kind of expect it to, but the fact that we get Eldritch Blast alone is just a great range damaging cantrip, even without Agonizing Blast, feels pretty good. Again, those 3 spell slots with each short rest that we get is also pretty nice. And overall, that kind of Fey charm, you kind of need to have a level of Archfey Warlock, you know, for this build to make sense, especially for the roleplay dialogue as well. We're going to have access to Bard, Wizard, and Warlock, Archfey specifically, dialogue, which just, it feels great in an actual playthrough. But yeah, anyways, that is going to do it for now. Let's quickly talk about the spells and the equipment. So, first up, the Infernal Rapier is going to be my weapon of choice for this build. Well, one of them anyway. Because mainly it's the only way we're going to be able to get planar ally Cambion, which is kind of integral to Tasha. Again, her biggest thing was summoning demons and devils back in the early day, so binding a Cambion to our service makes a ton of sense. It has access to charming magic, again, makes sense for an enchantment build, Draining Kiss and Raise of Fire, all of which are pretty damn good options. The weapon uses our spellcasting ability modifier, so we don't have to worry about our dexterity. It gives us a +1 bonus to spell save DC, which helps out with all of our spells, whether they be Warlock, Bard, or Wizard, and it's a +2 weapon in its own right. So, I think this is the best overall option. However, I do need to discuss some other things. Mainly our early game option, the spell Sparkler, which gives you two lightning charges every time you cast a spell or cantrip that deals damage. And lightning charges will allow you to have a +1 bonus to attack rolls and deal an additional 1 lightning damage with each attack that you do, eventually culminating into a bigger lightning attack. We're going to pair this with our other early game option for clothing, which is the Protecty Spark Wall, which gives you a +1 bonus to your spell save DC. Again, all of our spells get a buff, as well as long as you have lightning charges, you gain a +1 bonus to armor class and saving throws, which feels great. This is a pretty typical early game mage combo. However, I want to point out the Harper's Sacred Striker. This is a quarterstaff, so if you like your spellcasters to have a staff, this feels a lot better. But this is here kind of as a vanity item, but also as kind of a fun interpretation of the lore. You see, one of Tasha's most famous artifacts is her legendary greatsword that she does wield in certain situations. So there is precedence for a spell sword here. But it's not really her main thing. Again, that's more of her spell casting, and I didn't really want to find a way to shoehorn a greatsword onto this build, which I did try to initially, but my community kind of helped me decide against it, which is where I got the idea to incorporate the Harper's Sacred Striker. Rather than us wielding a greatsword ourselves, let's use a free level 6 version of Spiritual Weapon, which does a lot of damage and is another summon for us, that it can be a greatsword. So rather than us just using a greatsword, we literally summon a spectral vision of that artifact to fight alongside us as one of our summons. That might just be one of the coolest justifications for a spiritual weapon that I have ever thought of. So I am really happy to have this as kind of a maybe you just use it once per long rest type thing, you pop it in your weapon slot. Maybe you could even replace Warcaster with Dual Wielder to have both of these up at the same time, but I do think Warcaster is a little bit more viable, even if the extra AC from Dual Wielder would be nice. But anyway, that could potentially be an option for you. But the idea of just having a way to use a level 6 spiritual weapon in your back pocket to kind of get that vibe just feels right. So I wanted to include it here, as even if it is just an honorable mention. Right, moving on to the equipment proper. First up, we have the Warped Headband of Intellect, as I said, to set our intelligence score to 17. If you want to replace the necklace option here with the Amulet of Greater Health later on, you can dump Constitution and pump those points into Intelligence instead, and have better concentration saves overall, which would actually drop the need for Warcaster as well, freeing up that feat for something else, so feel free to do that if you like. But moving on, we have our Cloak of the Weave here. This is just here to give us more spell save DC and attack rolls, plus another +1 bonus. This is going to stack up really nicely, basically making it so all of our spells pretty much work most of the time. But it does also come with Absorb Elements once per short rest, allowing us to basically gain resistance to an elemental attack as a reaction and deal a bit of that damage back. We also have the Robe of the Weave here. This is pretty typical endgame wizard stuff, but it did feel like it fit the build the best, giving us another +1 bonus to our spell stuff, as well as allowing us to, whenever we succeed a saving throw against a spell, we regain a bit of HP, and a +2 to our armor class. Our armor class is a bit of a weakness on this build. It's not the highest, which is why, again, feel free to play around with stuff, but otherwise, it's not too bad. Moving on to our gloves, the Abyss Beckoners. We are a summoner, and as such, we're going to have a lot of things fighting for us on the battlefield at once. And this makes all of our summoned creatures, including Spiritual Weapon funnily enough, have resistance to all damage except Psychic. But it comes with a risk. They must succeed a Wisdom saving throw every turn, or be driven mad. Except that's not really a downside for us. If you're using Animate Dead or Create Undead from the Cryptlord ring, which is our ring of choice, or the ghouls from the Necromancy of Thay, which I also recommend that you do for this build. I feel like that makes sense. The Sentient Amulet and the Necromancy of Thay are two very, very good quests to run with this build. More info in the description. I linked the wiki pages for all of this stuff. The Abyss Beckoners basically don't affect them. All of, basically undead creatures, spiritual weapon, and all that cannot be afflicted by the madness condition, as well as, for example, the Diva and the Cambion. The Cambion can't be affected by the madness either, actually, it's immune. And the Diva, while it can potentially be affected by the madness, its wisdom score is so high that that never happened in any of my testing. The only one that did tend to fall for the madness quite a bit was the Quasit. Cheeky little thing. But as you can see, we also have the Scroll of Animate Dead here, which I forgot to describe earlier. Whoops. But honestly, the Abyss Beckoners are basically, for this specific build, a no downside Omni resistance for all of our summoned creatures, which is kind of huge. So honestly, for this summoner build, these are kind of required to run. And they're an early game option as well. And finally, the Helldusk Boots. Remember that brief comment I made about Tasha dating a demon? Well, let's just say maybe this was a wedding gift. This allows us to harness the power of the Hells a little bit to make it so that we cannot be forcibly moved by our foe's spell or actions, and ignore the effects of difficult terrain. What it doesn't mention here, actually, is that also prevents us from being knocked prone, meaning that we can't drop concentration by being knocked prone, which is kind of nice. And also, whenever we fail a saving throw, we may use our reaction to succeed instead, which is actually pretty nice as well. Again, we can guarantee that we maintain concentration if we need to. It's also going to give us another teleport in the form of Hellcrawler. Again, known for teleporting, it allows us to teleport to an area and deal fire damage where we land, once per short rest. But of course, in the early game, just grab the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, meaning that you can't slip on most surfaces or get entangled, as well as you gain a Misty Step per short rest. For our amulets, I've got the Fey Semblance Amulet, giving us advantage on all mental saving throws, but again, this can be swapped out, but I felt like this kind of made sense for an Archfey Warlock. I've already mentioned the Cryptlord Ring to give us access to Create Undead, to allow us to summon a powerful Mummy Lord. Again, Necromancy is our thing. And finally, the Ring of Blink. We're all about playing our travel, so being able to escape into the ethereal plane for a bit when we need to can work, and makes a lot of sense for this build. However, I will warn you, some summons, such as the Cambion, basically any summon that comes from being summoned as from like a piece of equipment, will disappear if we blink, because technically we unequip the equipment, which is weird to say, but it is true. So do be warned. If you don't care about that little bit of flavour, might be worth swapping this one out for something else. Maybe Arcane Synergy or something like that, or Mental Fatigue. You know, there's a lot of things you can work with here. But yes, overall that is the build. Not much else to say. Oh, make sure you have the Spellcrux Amulet in your back pocket so you can recover that level 6 spell slot, because you're going to want to use it as much as you can. As well as for the armor, the camp clothing that I have here is from Fear Taylor's Camp Clothing. This is the Mage version 6 robe with the leather boots, both coloured in Faerunian colours, Besheba dye, which gives us this really nice kind of deep black and purple vibe, which I absolutely love. But yes, that is the build, and overall I think it's pretty cool. I think it represents Tasha pretty damn well, getting most of her abilities that I can see on my checklist here. I don't think I missed anything here. Nope. Pretty much covered all of it, which is good. Like I say, make sure you do the Sentient Amulet and the Necromancy of Thay quest lines. Make sure you grab the Scroll of Summon Quasit and the Scroll of Bestial Communion. And you're pretty much off to the races. But again, there's room to change things up in this build if you so desire. Move some equipment around, move some stats around. But overall, you've got a pretty damn accurate representation of Tasha. The only thing that I think could make it better is if you use the Literal Mistress spell mod to add the rest of Tasha's spells, like Tasha's Caustic Brew and such like that, and just have access to a much wider array of spells to pick from for your build. Hell, I would even recommend going with the level 20 mod here, maybe putting some more levels into Wizard, for example, maybe jumping that up to Wizard 8 and just getting some more spell levels, getting some more prepared spell slots that way, access to more spells from Mistress spells as well. There's a lot you could do with this build if you want to put in the little bit of extra legwork with some mods to make it work. But overall, as a Tasha build, this absolutely works, or Igwilf, I should say. I mean, technically her name is Igwilf now, but come on, Tasha is just It's better. It's more recognizable. It's from the book. This is gonna have Tasha in the title to draw in the D&D fans for the video. You know how it is. You know how it is. But yeah, I really do hope you guys enjoyed this build, as I had a lot of fun coming up with it with the community. The next Patron build will be you know who. So you know, I think that'll be a fun one, and I hope to see more of you in the future. So yeah, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.